Good evening. Just over 20 years ago, those twice-nightly newscasts we all take for granted didn't even exist. The first regularly scheduled newscast was on CBS in August of 1948, titled Douglas Edwards with the News. It lasted 15 minutes and was little more than an announcement of the headlines. John Cameron Swayze and the Camel News Caravan went on the air for NBC that fall. And later in 1963, Walter Cronkite and the Huntley-Brinkley Report expanded network newscasts to 30 minutes. No one was sure people would watch a news program that was that long. But when President Kennedy was assassinated that November, all three networks carried continuous live coverage for most of 4 days, and many of us stayed up to watch all of it. Since then, live coverage has become common from practically any place in the world. TV news has, in fact, covered nearly every subject but itself. So this is a look at the side of the news you don't usually see. One day with the people at TV-8 who assemble the newscasts. Ken Peterson and I put this report together, and in just a minute, he'll sign you on with the day shift.
Right now, only one person from the night shift remains in the newsroom. The most recently hired reporters work during the late night hours, and their duties end when the morning shift, George Wylie and Bill Johnson, come to work at 6:45. We'll cover the whole news day right up until sign-off, so maybe you should bring your lunch. We'll get busy right after this message.
Good morning. This is Des Moines Television, KCCI-TV, Channel 8 in Des Moines, Iowa, now signing on the air. KCCI-TV, owned and operated by Coles Broadcasting Incorporated, transmits on Channel 8 by authority of the Federal Communications Commission at 316,000 watts of video power.
There are no buzzers, horns, or bells to signal the beginning of another news day at TV-8. But like always, Bill Johnson and George Wylie are the earliest to arrive.
Some days there isn't any news that happens in the morning. We have a lot of things from overnight, late night armed robberies, traffic accidents that occur overnight.
Others, like Brooks Humphreys, arrive around 9:30. By mid-morning, the news machine is running on all cylinders, with assignment editor Mike Reynolds calling the shots. In this case, the Iowa impact of the recently imposed grain embargo.
Well, they're buying if somebody's willing to sell at that price. They're posting those prices, and if that's the question, are people going to start coming in, panicking, and sell at that price?
12 reporters will work alongside 4 photographers today, covering everything from Vice President Mondale's visit to a fatal accident on Southeast 14th. The news staff will report, film, edit, and produce 13 stories for tonight's 6 p.m. newscast.
You have to know what's important to your city and to your area. In this case, it's Des Moines and it's Central Iowa. Stress Central Iowa because we always consider that in our news judgments, because we cover about 35 counties and about 1 million people. Right now, I think what the public needs to know and what the public wants to know is probably closer together than at any other time in history. With the energy problems that we're facing, with inflation, and with the problems that we face every day with our bank accounts, I think what we need to know and want to know are very close together.
Almo Hawkins and Michele Morrissey Burgad are sent immediately to the airport to cover the Vice President's arrival. With the advent of ENG, that's electronic news gathering, most TV photographers now use videotape cameras. That means more cables, batteries, and other equipment compared to a film camera.
I would like for cameras to be more light sensitive so we don't have to drag so much gear, and for the gear to be, although you can carry it now, not have so many cords to be tripping on, so you could run with a little faster, so you could follow action more rather than trying to having to, you know, set someone here and do it here. And I don't want to say stage things, but so that you can keep up with things and be one step ahead of what's going on.
The technical side slows down the journalistic side.
I think so.
As Almo and Michele disassemble and repack all their equipment at the airport, the Vice President's motorcade speeds to 9th and Pleasant, the location of KCCI-TV. Mondale comments on the press coverage he and the President both received.
I think press coverage is excellent. In a free society, and thank God we're free, the right of the press, television, radio, to cover us and to comment is unlimited and should be unlimited. I don't say I agree with everything I hear, but I might be wrong too. That's for the American people to decide. But an old reporter once told me that there are no bad questions, only bad answers, and I've tried to live up to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I never lied more in my life.
CBS reporter Bob McNamara was a part of the TV-8 newsroom that day. Not an unusual occurrence this year, as the newsmakers come to Iowa and the network reporters come to cover them. We asked McNamara what he thought of Mondale's assessment of the press.
Yeah, it was a politician's answer, all right. And I think it was a fair answer. He said that he didn't agree with a lot of the things that had been said about him, and they usually don't. A lot of them see themselves as martyrs rather than people who are trying to sell themselves to get into office. I think they see the press as a necessary evil. They've got to have the press, or they wouldn't be Walter Mondale's or Jimmy Carter's or George Bush's. They wouldn't be where they are.
Do you think the public has an obligation to be informed, to pay attention, to listen, to learn?
Sure, sure. And they shouldn't just get their news from television or radio, they ought to read a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't do that. And I was covering a trial the other day, and there was a farmer on the jury who said he only got his news from TV and rarely ever read the paper. I thought that was really sad.
And while the network television crews can spend all their time on the vice president, local TV crews have to cover things locally.
As we always pray for news, pray for something to happen, something unexpected to happen. And we don't want something tragic to happen, really, but we like for what we call spot news, unexpected news to occur.
During the noon hour, the unexpected and the tragic do occur. George Wylie and Mark Swanson rush out the door for probably the least favorite of assignments, a fatal accident, this one on Southeast 14th.
Send him down there, 21. Come on. 452. 5. Also, we have 2 regular tow trucks and a big rig coming. Thank you. Come on, 504.
But while the two work as a team, their approaches to the same story differ.
You just look through that little monitor and just make like you're watching it on TV, just like everybody else. You don't have any feelings. You can't. There are times when I have had feelings, you know, like, gee, that's really too bad, you know, and which it is. But, you know, if I had feelings about it, like you out this morning, I shot a 2-year-old kid, fell out of a truck, you know. If I had feelings like that, I couldn't do my job.
Today, we had a traffic accident during the day. And something like that happening any time, and you have to go out on it, it just leaves you with a very, very bad feeling about the whole day. You maintain your objectivity, and you say, you know, I am an observer here, and I can't get involved in this. But there's no way you can't get involved when there's human life involved. If you're a human being and have any feelings at all. Things like the accident today leave me feeling very badly.
Meanwhile, back at the station, reporters and photographers try to squeeze in time to eat lunch. Brooks Humphreys, who's working on a local angle on the embargo, Almo Hawkins working on her story on the Vice President's visit, and Dave Buzik taking a break from his story on the Yonkers fire hearing.
We put great emphasis on our reporters. We try to hire the best reporters, and reporters who will have a following in their own right. The reporter has to be very inquisitive, has to be wondering about all the things that go on around him. 2, he has to have a basic sense of fairness, has to be able to come off with a story that is fair to both sides, or in many cases, several sides.
I try to be fair. I try to, if someone writes in, I take what they tell me and I go to the store and talk to them first off camera and see what they have to say. In most cases, the thing is settled and it never even goes on the air. I have to be very careful to not be unfair to somebody, because a lot of these things are just misunderstandings.
The next hour in the newsroom will be busier than the previous 8 combined. Most are working on stories that will air at 6 p.m., but Kevin Cooney is editing a Covering Iowa film story that will be used at a later date.
My particular stories, for the most part, on Covering Iowa deal primarily with the human interest, the man with the collection of 500 violins, or the man with the bowling alley in his barn.
People stories.
People stories. The things that certainly we could survive with if we didn't see them on the news every night, but it's kind of nice to be reassured every day that despite the crises that we have throughout the world, that 99 and 44, 100% of us are just plugging along just like normal, doing the things that really make us Iowans, I guess you could say.
What do we say? Like, how would I say, like numerous other Iowa farmers, they elected to hold their grain production the first of the year. I think today one of the problems is life has become very complicated. Stories have become very complicated, and reporters are thrown into situations where they don't really have a great deal of basic knowledge about it, like the grain embargo. None of us in the newsroom here is an expert on grain marketing, and all of a sudden we're called upon, our reporters are, to do stories on the grain embargo, the effects of it, and they have to learn a great deal in a very short time in order to try to interpret this. And it's very difficult sometimes in a complicated story.
Enter Doug Kretzinger, director for the 6 and 10 o'clock news. During this time period, Doug is busy marking scripts and consulting with Paul RHODES. Meanwhile, in the editing room, photographers and reporters are still working on 3 stories.
When I have very, very little time to work, it will serve to make the story easier to understand, because I don't have time to sit around and agonize over whether to use this word or that word, and it will usually come out in its simplest form, so that strictly in terms of understanding it, you shouldn't have any trouble understanding it, because I don't have time to mess around with it.
Co-anchor Rick Fredericksen now enters, and he and Paul make last-minute preparations for the newscast, including the 5:30 promo.
A fatal accident in Des Moines today, and I don't have the scripts. Let's see. More on the embargo and more on grain prices.
A fatal accident in Des Moines today, and more on the embargo with today's current grain prices. Those stories and more.
You've got to learn to listen to your director and follow everything he says, and sometimes try to anticipate what he's going to be asking for, so you can kind of help him out when things start to get congested, especially a half an hour before a newscast, when everything really starts to get kind of hectic. And every bit of pressure or some of the load you can take off the director when you're a floor assistant, the better.
Through the years, people have gotten used to seeing us on the news, knowing that we'll be here tomorrow and next year and probably the year after that. During that same period of time, the other channels have had maybe 12, 14 different anchor people. Some of them quite good, but they're here only a couple of years, and then someone new. And I think that factor of habit is very important and has been to us. I don't think there's probably another station in the country that's had 2 of their major newscasts anchored by the same people since the time they went on the air.
The boxes were hazardous because someone trying to escape.
When all the stories have been written, all the tape and film edited, the script and the newscast are in the hands of news production director Doug Kretzinger. His job is to put it all together. That happens in studio control, and we'll go there after this.
So right now I'm looking at last night's 10 o'clock air check that we did. I didn't get to see it. We had a couple late stories. One was on the accident on Southwest 9th, and one was a fire. And they came in late, and I didn't get a good chance to see how it came off, and I've already passed it up, and I was looking at it and see how it came off. It came off pretty good.
Well, you said you didn't see it, and yet you were directing it.
Well, yeah, I didn't get a chance to see if it worked the way it should have, because things were going kind of fast at that time, and it felt good, but I wanted to make sure it came off okay, so I looked at it today, and it seemed like it worked.
What makes a newscast feel good?
Kind of hard to say. You just kind of, no mistakes is a #1 priority. And #2 is I guess it's something that you just kind of feel. Everything fits, tapes hit, all the inserts are spelled right, and that's what makes it click.
Could we show it this afternoon?
Oh, I'm there away. The peak of my day is, the first peak of my day is 6 o'clock, the second peak is 10 o'clock. And then, yeah, it builds up to those 2 times. And I get used to it after a while. Been doing it a long time. Been doing the news since '73, or 4, full-time, Monday through Friday. And so I've been doing it a long time. We've gone through a lot of changes. The idea is to make sure you don't have any surprises. To keep with it and watch everybody and see what's going on. 10 seconds, 30 black. Keep ahead of the game, and then if you don't have any surprises, you got a good newscast. A surprise will kill you sometimes.
Tomorrow on CBS.
Black, 182 at the cart. Fade black, going 4.
Next.
Fade everything down to black and kill it. Ready up on 4 sound.
You know what I love about
Paul monitor, camera 2. Camera 1 is Paul blue. Film 1. Slide change, ME2, chroma key is camera 2, ME1. Paul monitor, camera 2. Ready black, ready next on 4, coming up on ME3, video 4 sound. Go black, hit next, up on ME3 sound. Ready on a white, camera 2.
It's 6 o'clock.
Paul will throw us Victor 5 sound. Ready on white, camera 2, ready, Rhodes. Paul, ready 5, take 2 full. ME3, video. Stand by the crack, Victor 5, ready, Victor 5 sound.
The victim was identified as 20-year-old Robert Ryan, Jr. of 1415 East Capitol in Des Moines. TV-8's George Wylie was at the scene.
Back by sound, camera 2
in the accident forced traffic to be rerouted for several hours around Southeast 14th at Hartford.
And let's
3 of
Jenny
the 4
down.
were treated at hospitals
So
and
that we don't
released.
see the window on the
30-year-old John
lose the Jenny at 69
68 East 7th,
followed by
driving this Honda, suffered a broken
35.
kneecap and a severe head cut. He is being treated at Mercy Medical Center.
Tell Paul I'm going to... The idea of the game is coordination. Making their newscast that they put together come out the way they want it, putting everything in order, and that's the name of the game, and pulling that off keeps you busy.
$1.85 million.
Certain days it is rough, and then other days it's just not so bad. I'm known to have a temper, but I figure that's good, because if I don't have a temper, I'm going to keep it inside. Now, sometimes I really go crazy. Not so much anymore, but I'm angry at the situation. The situation should never have occurred. I love working with Russ, Paul. There's nobody here I don't like to work with. That is a fact. I used to work on a farm, which had nothing to do with TV.
No. Have you ever thought of going back to the farm?
No.
Today's decision.
When ME3 sound.
Hey, Connie, Rick and Pete, and thank you for joining us.
Next news tonight at 10, be with us and Russ.
Up until 6 o'clock, the news department has spent 128 working hours preparing for the newscast, and that doesn't count sports. The engineering staff has spent more than 100 working hours up to now, and 14 people from both departments were directly involved in the live broadcast. At 6:30, it's all over.
This is TV-8 KCCI-TV Des Moines.
Now the whole process begins all over again in the hands of the late shift. After an early dinner, Russ VANDYKE joins the staff. He's already been here most of the afternoon working on his weekly special report. Now he and Rick FREDERICKSEN have 3 hours to cover evening news stories and get ready for the 10 p.m. newscast.
Try to appreciate what people are interested in and what you think people should know about. And there's no rule of thumb. I think you could take 20 people putting together a newscast and you'd probably have 10 different lead stories. So there's no really right or wrong. I think it's a matter of common sense and trying to feel what your audience is interested in. You have to remember, when I got out of school in 1940, there were no courses in radio, television, journalism. We taught ourselves. So I didn't really make news my full-time vocation. I was a general announcer, dance band remote announcer, sports announcer, actually. So it was when I came to Des Moines, to KRNT Radio, that I really went to doing news full-time. And in those days, you didn't have reporters. You just read what was on the wire. If you had an engineer to turn on the microphone, that's all the help you needed. And now look at all the people.
Basically, I'm basically a reader for the 6 o'clock news, let's face it, folks. I just come in and I look over the script. I don't really like to know too much about it. The script is written. Other people have put many hours of work into it. So I look over the script, I read the 6, and then I really get involved with it when Russ and I split up the duties of making assignments and re-editing. The big problem at 10 o'clock is that we've got to cover the world. At 6 o'clock, Paul Rhodes and the rest of the news team cover Iowa because it follows Walter Cronkite. So we have to get everything in 30 minutes, including the weather and the sports. So it's really tough to cut it down. I get tired of telling people bad news all the time. I really wonder how vital my role is sometimes. One of the important things that we do between 6 and 10 is to try and change the news presentation as much as possible between the two newscasts. We can't change the news, but we change the approach. There might be 2 different angles to one story. There may be a new development that we'll have to follow up. There's just a lot that goes on between 6 and 10 o'clock. We've got a staff of 3 reporters at night, and they're very busy.
We have been fortunate in having good people around us, and we've kept good people around us. And so I think people learn to accept us as part of the family. I think radio and television news in the Midwest is the best in the nation, better than either coast. And one of the reasons I think is because our audience is the best. We have a highly intelligent audience in Iowa. Some of my favorite people to interview, by the way, were farmers, because they, I guess, have time to think of things. They're out on that tractor or that combine. What they're doing is mechanical, so their minds have time to work. And they seem to have opinions on a great many things. They've thought about them. You meet a lot of people over the years, and I think that's where you get the satisfaction and feeling that you've done some good occasionally. After all, people do have to be informed.
And if everything seems to happen almost without effort, it's only because everyone depends upon everyone else, and everyone does his job. Considering that every newscast is live and unrehearsed, that's a lot of cooperation. And it happens in hundreds of stations very much like this one, 7 days a week all over the country. And as they say, we do it all for you. A word about this program after this. By the way, during the day you just saw, the engineering department and news department together put in 398.5 total working hours. Kent Peterson and Craig Luthi from the station shot all the videotape, and we spent about 120 hours putting the show together. Thanks for being with us. Good night.